It is a role in our country that goes back to the year 1620. And yet so many of us know so little about the job, despite the fact that it's quite significant in the daily life of Canada. What job am I talking about? Well, stick around and find out when we go one-on-one with author John Fraser, coming up next on the Paikin Podcast. I am delighted to welcome John Fraser, author, bon vivant, man about town, former correspondent for the Globe and Mail, and a guy whose new book, let me show the books here so everybody knows what we're talking about, is called The Governors General, An Intimate History of Canada's Highest Office. It's published by Sutherland House Press. And John, it is a delight to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Better for being on your show. I mean, people, would pay a fortune to get what I'm about to get. Be on your show.
And yet you paid me nothing. And yet you paid me
Yes.
nothing. This is really a shame. Yeah, it's okay. Well, let's talk about this book, which is, I can tell everybody, I have read it. It's fantastic. That's one of the reasons you are on here, because I enjoyed it so much. But this is, let's be honest, this is not a role that a lot of Canadians necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about, but you do. How come?
What a good question. I don't know. I grew up in a house where was largely indifferent to the crown. In fact, I had a mother who went through a period of time where she was very anti-crown, wouldn't stand up for God Save the Queen, but she liked military tattoos. So can you imagine how humiliating that was to go be 10 years old with your mother wouldn't stand up for God Save the Queen in 1955? Anyway, I think I'm a romantic, and I also had encounters. That's what's weird about this book is I had early encounters, first with Vincent Massey and then with the Vaniers, and I guess that seeded things to some extent.
Well, we're going to go through them, and I actually want to go through every single one of the governors general that you have known. But let's also say I was at your book launch yesterday at Massey College, and when Ken White, the publisher, got up to the microphone, he said, "This is without doubt the sexiest topic we have ever done a book about at Sutherland House Press." And I'm pretty sure he was kidding, but I'm just trying to imagine the conversation that you two had where either you suggested to him or he suggested to you, "I got this incredibly sexy topic that I think we need a book about. It's about the history of governors general." How did that go exactly?
It's a story. I'll try and keep it compact. I have a friend and who is a mentor and a benefactor, and his name's Honorable H.N.L. Jackman, former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, former Chancellor of the University of Toronto, and the former visitor at the college. I had such a great time for 20 years running at Massey College in the U of T. And he asked me on the eve of my 80th birthday, what was my next book? And I said, I'm not doing books anymore. I'm not like Steve Paikin. I can't just churn them out. They're hard work, and I'm getting old. I take naps. He said, nonsense. You should do a book on the Governor Generals of Canada. And I said, oh, that'll go to the top of the hit parade. That's what the world's waiting for. And he said, no. He said, you're mischievous. It'll be fun. And I didn't think anything more of it. When I went away, I realized not only am I so old, but I'm so old that if you just start with the Canadians, not the British grandees who had it up to 1952, I have known all of them. And I know quite interesting stories about all of them, one way or another, for different reasons. And I thought I could write a good book. I'm not a scholar. I'm a journalist and maybe a tiny bit of a voyeur. And I thought I could write a good book. So I told Mr. Jackman that I thought I could write a good book, but still there were only going to be 15 people that would buy it. And he said, no. He said, this country needs some education. The Jackman Foundation will make sure that this book gets to libraries and to. Oh, I said, that's great. Well, that's more than 15. Well, anyway, so I went to Ken White, basically with an audience of about 1,000 already keen to get it, even though if they didn't know they would do it. What is shockingly amazing is the timing. I think I have partly to thank Mr. Trump for this. He's changed Canadians into people concerned about their country and the systems that they live under, and at a time of transition in the office itself. And it's about to hands again. So it's in the news.
That's right, because as we sit here taping this, the newest Governor General to replace Mary Simon is about to be announced. We don't know who it's going to be, but to be sure, this story is going to be in the news a lot in the days ahead. Fair to say?
Yes. And in fact, as part of the promotion for the book, the Globe Mail asked me to do an essay, which is online now. I guess it's going in the paper tomorrow, and who I thought would be the next great Governor General. So I said myself, actually, but
yes, you did.
but I had to disqualify myself for several reasons. One, my wife would walk out on me, and secondly, I've got too many flaws in personality and too much baggage to take into the job. This is as poor Julie Payette found out. This is a position that is merciless. It's merciless, maybe more than an elected position, because there is a sense that you're getting a sort of a life on a silver platter, and therefore we have a right to look into every detail of your life. This is speaking as a creepy journalist, and in her case, it took the Toronto Star 2 nanoseconds to find out some tragic things in her past that, if the Prime Minister's office had done due diligence, would have precluded her from getting that job. We're
going to come back to her. Yeah, we want to build up to Julie Payette, because, as you pointed out, the role does go back to the year 1620, and you have not known governors general in Canada for that long, but you definitely have known them all.
Where Champlain was.
Well, that's pretty good. But you definitely have known them all since the 1950s, when we got our first Canadian-born Governor General, who was Vincent Massey. And my first question about each of them individually is, why do you think it took 85 years from the time Canada became a country to the time where we finally got our first Canadian-born Governor General? Why so long?
Well, it could have come in the 30s. Mackenzie King didn't want one. He just preferred to get a British grandee. It's really hard to summon up the Canada of the pre-50s. It was a country that it may have been a quasi-colony still in a way, although we had since Confederation. But people weren't struggling under the burden of being lackeys to the British Empire. They're quite proud of it, and so the fact that a person with a title had these sort of grandee positions representing the sovereign, it wasn't controversial. It was something that people wanted to be involved with. So it was an evolving thing. Canada's a country that doesn't do revolutions very well, but we do evolution quite well, and is careful and cautious, and that we in fact spent about 30 years before figuring out who we would get for the first Governor General. And when we did choose one, we got someone that was more English than the English. That was there was an English aristocrat who said that when he was around Vincent Massey, he felt like such a monster and an uncouth soul. I think he was a duke or a marquis.
Now, Vincent Massey, when he became the first Canadian-born Governor General, again, this is before I was born, but you would have remembered this, and you did meet him. How big a deal was it in Canada to finally get a Canadian-born GG?
I think it was a big deal at the time. I was very young. I mean, he was appointed Governor General in 52. I was born in 44, so that lets you know how old I was. But I did meet him just after he stepped down from office. In the story that I put in the book, which is meant to be a funny way to start the book off. But he was a big deal, partly because, as Robertson Davies said, he was a dreamer. He had some unpleasant personality traits, but he was also the guy who dreamed up the Canada Council, the Order of Canada, Hart House at the University of Toronto, my college, Massey College. So he was a mixture of things, both very much a product of his time and his class, as well as someone who could actually dream beyond those limitations.
Well, in fact, for those who don't know, Hart House is named after someone in the Massey family, Hart Massey. Hart's the guy's first name. And what was the relationship between Hart Massey and Vincent Massey?
Hart Massey was his father, and also he named his son Hart. So several generations of Hart Masseys.
Mm-hmm. And yet you say in the book, John, that you don't think Mr. Massey was that good a guy. Why'd you say that?
Well, he had those character flaws that people of his class and age had. I think he was probably, can you say, a bit of an anti-Semite? I mean, he certainly was. Yeah, he comes off badly on that front. He was a snob. He insisted. I mean, this is almost incredible to tell the story of a Canadian, but he insisted on being bowed to and curtsied when he became vice-regal. Even in his privacy of his family, his wife, not his wife, but his sister-in-law was expected to curtsy when she left the room. It's just very hard to recreate that kind of atmosphere and tell it with a straight face. So this wasn't an entirely pleasant person, but he was someone who did love Canada and did dream about it and left it with some amazing institutions. Really amazing. They're still going strong.
His successor, yes, indeed. His successor was a man named Georges Vanier, appointed in 1959, a war hero who had a prosthetic leg. Maybe we could start there. What's the story behind how Mr. Vanier lost his leg?
He lost his leg in battle in the First World War. It was part of, you can say, it was part of his appeal. He was a veteran with his service evident for every time he walked with his cane and clicked his leg into place. He looked the role. He was a elegant, patrician, lovely-looking old gentleman. He had a spectacular wife who was sort of trained in the job. He had been an ADC to the famous Lord Byng, who was a British Governor General of Canada, and they were of the old school, and they moved into Rideau Hall almost as if they'd lived there all their life. And they also had a natural way of reaching out to people, which Vincent Massey never did. Vincent Massey was not a natural people person. He was a dreamer, and he dreamed up great institutions. But you wouldn't have wanted to go on a canoe trip with him, whereas you would have gone with the Vaniers anywhere in the world because they were a lovely, warm couple.
Was Georges Vanier our first French-Canadian Governor General?
He was.
Did that make him more palatable to the people of Quebec?
Yes and no. He was Governor General during a time of transition in Quebec, during the Cultural Revolution. So he lived to hear himself being called a traitor on a Jean Baptiste Day, and it was something that wounded him deeply. But there was a whole generation of Quebecers who revered him, and a lot more Anglo-Canadians. But he lived at that transition, that difficult transition period for the country.
He's the first one I remember, and I was interested to note that you say in the book that you think the job cost him his life. What did you mean by that?
That was his wife's line. She said he died for Canadian unity because Mr. Pearson wanted, it was centennial year that he died, 1967, which was a big year for Canada. I think you're old enough to remember that, don't you?
I sure am.
So he wanted a French Canadian to still be in office. There was a whole stream of heads of state coming to visit, including Le Grand Charles from Paris, Charles de Gaulle. But Madame Vanier said he died for Canadian unity because he did not want to keep going. It especially during such a strenuous year. So he died in office.
Well, his successor had an even more monumental task, and that was Roland Michener, who was appointed, as you point out, in 1967, and was the Governor General a few years later when Canada went through the October crisis. The British Trade Commissioner was kidnapped. The Quebec Labor Minister, Pierre Laporte, was assassinated by the separatists in Quebec. And I wonder what role Governor General Michener had during all of that.
Two things that are interesting about that crisis and the Governor General. The key person the separatists wanted to kidnap was the Governor General. They wanted him tied up to a chair with cameras on him, and so the whole country could be watched, and with a deadline for him being executed on air. So there was that. And then the other thing was, I believe I was right in writing that he insisted Trudeau's officials let him know who had been arrested. He wanted to know all the names. And he was just quietly on guard for citizens. What was he going to do about it? I don't know. But he didn't want his office to look that it was just neutered during this period, that he was the person who actually wanted to have the names of people who were incarcerated for whatever reason.
The thing I think most people remember about Roland Michener, to the extent that he is remembered, is that he used to jog around this country in a red tracksuit and champion something called participaction. He wanted Canadians to get up off their couches and work out. What kind of legacy do you think that leaves?
I don't think these things last much beyond the person's life. He was called the last imperial viceroy because he wore the extraordinary outfit, the British colonial outfit the governors wore, which had a lot of gold here and a hat with ostrich feathers. Can you imagine anyone trying to wear that today in Ottawa? But he was the last to do that, and he was a nice guy, gentle chap. He started us journalists should be grateful to him. He started the Michener Awards for excellence in journalism, and but he was not of the same character as Vanier. He came from that same class though, that was very used to being service in the public realm and comfortable with the symbolism of a lot of the stuff that he had to deal with. So it was in my view, it was a good Governor General.
He was succeeded by Jules Léger, another Francophone, appointed in 1974. And I guess one of the disastrous things that happened on his watch was that he had a stroke only 6 months into his term. What happens when the Governor General becomes incapacitated for a long period of time, as Monsieur Léger was?
Well, I have to say, I hope there's no Légers listening. It was a heaven-sent stroke because it established the point that the viceregal spouse was just as good at handling the particular ceremonial part of the Governor General's job, which is ceremonial and honorific. It's reading speeches from the throne, it's handing out medals, it's presiding at dinners, and as Léger health improved, he never really got his speech properly back, and he had mobility issues, but he didn't have to give up the office because Madame Léger effortlessly took it over. There is a wonderful scene during a throne speech. He would come in, he could just get about 2 sentences out, and then Esmond Butler, the secretary, was basically the deputy minister of the Governor General, would go up very reverentially, take the speech from Mr. Léger, and then hand it to Madame Léger, sitting on a smaller seat to the other side, and she would just continue reading it. And it gave me the example I wanted to make a point in the book, which is that the toughest thing in this whole viceregal game is being a partner of someone who's made a Governor General. It's the Prince Philip job, the 2 steps behind, in which you say nothing and basically have to eat your ego. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think Madame Léger showed through that unhappy incident of the stroke that there's a way of sharing. And my view is that a modern relationship is built on a lot more equality than our grandparents had. And that there'd be ways, small maybe, but ways in which that can be shown. And there were viceregal consorts that had no problem with the position. Madame Vanier had no issue with it. John Ralston Saul, who was married to Adrienne Clarkson, had a very strong sense of himself, and he knew what he wanted to push in this position. But all the others had a problem. And I once had an interview with Stephen Harper, and he said the single biggest problem he had with most of his viceregal appointments was spousal alienation. You wouldn't know anything about that. You and I wouldn't know anything about that. But I can tell you, when I was once asked if I wanted to be considered for a lieutenant governor's job, I had to say that my wife said, if you want to play queen, you're going to do it alone, because I've done this for you for 20 years at Massey College. So it was never going to be on the board. So
Oh, do tell. What lieutenant governor's position were you vetted for?
Well, the only one I would be eligible for, which is Ontario, and it was
Ontario?
yeah, it was a process that had started with Mr. Harper, in which he created a committee to advise him on viceregal appointments, and the committee had an office in Ottawa, and would get extra people for the different provinces if they were going for lieutenant governor. It's how Mr. Johnston got chosen, how Mrs. Dowd's, about 3 or 4 lieutenant governors. And what Harper wanted, he still wanted the privilege of recommending to the king. I'll give you the official way of describing this. A person to be either a governor general or a lieutenant governor, but he wanted them vetted. He wanted to know who was appropriate. So he wanted 5 names from a sphere of different influences. He wanted to make sure that there were no problems with any of them, so that he could just look at them and he could decide who was the best person for the country. And I thought that is a kind of evolutionary breakthrough in the position. And that was where, and it was in that sort of a process that I was interviewed who I thought I might like to see make a man for lieutenant governor. And at the end of it, I said, well, would you ever consider it? And that's when I told them what Elizabeth McCallum, my wife,
who is your wife, and so who ended up getting the job instead of you?
And on that occasion, it was Mrs. Dowdeswell. That
was Elizabeth Dowdeswell, who was the longest serving in Ontario history, and by all accounts,
a wonderful, wonderful appointment.
When you look up Lieutenant Governor of Ontario in the dictionary, her picture should be there. She was absolutely the best at it.
She had
not to say you wouldn't have been wonderful, but
but she had an asset that I didn't have. She was not married.
Right. No spousal alienation in her case. That is true.
And she gave it her all. You could almost argue that should be a criterion.
We'll be back right after this. The Insurance Brokers Association of Canada is all about protection. This spring, they will be in Ottawa to advocate for a consumer-first approach to federal initiatives around natural disasters, cybersecurity, and other risks that Canadians face every day. Insurance protects families, homes, and businesses when the unexpected happens. Brokers are your trusted advisors, helping you choose the right insurance to safeguard what you value most. Canada's Insurance Brokers. Their slogan is, "We know what's worth protecting." All right, we're going to get back to the list here. We ended up at Jules Léger, and now we go back to 1979, and this is Edward Schreyer.
Yeah.
Who is a curious choice because, number one, he's only 44 years old. Number two, Pierre Trudeau appointed him, and he's a former NDP premier of Manitoba. Yeah. Why did he get picked?
It was Barrett. It was going to be in this tradition of the other ones. It was everything that I was able to find out. It was going to be a guy named George Ignatieff, the father of Michaëlle Ignatieff, who was a diplomat and a public servant. But he was. Trudeau was persuaded that he should try something different to brighten up the office from the old gray-haired men. And I think that Schreyer also was in Trudeau's good books because he had supported some of the constitutional initiatives that Mr. Trudeau had made. In any event, we learned several things from that. Is you should not appoint someone too young for that job, because when it's finished, what do you do? In his case, they had to get him something, so they made him High Commissioner to Australia, and that finished, and then he wanted to do something more, so he ran for office.
That's right. He ran again for the federal NDP, didn't he?
So that's the lesson from there. And the other thing, Mr. Schreyer is a good and decent man, and he had one incalculable asset, which was his wife, Lily Schreyer, who was a warm, open-hearted person and made people feel welcome. But he was a good man who was quintessentially dull. I mean, he was. It just, there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you need dull people to keep things done. And he was for when he was premier, as far as I knew, he was okay. He didn't get reelected. But the bad thing was it started a process where basically disused politicians were given the position. And that went on for 2, 3, or 4 postings.
Well, that takes us to the next one, who is Jeanne Sauvé, appointed 1984, again by Pierre Trudeau, first female governor general ever.
That was
I guess I
important.
got a couple of questions here. Why did it take nearly 120 years before we finally got a female GG?
Well, Steve, what years were you at University of Toronto? When did you?
1978 to 81.
So you arrived when all that stuff was settled, but Massey College and Hart House and the residences, they were all single sex. Everything, people were divided up until the end of the 60s, and women just did not take on those kinds of roles. The first female prime minister in Britain was Mrs. Thatcher, and that was when? Not till the 70s.
Yep.
We've only had one. The Americans still are trying to figure out how to get a woman elected. She may never want the job now, but anyway, I think it's just the times. The interesting thing is governors, some of the viceregal chatelaines were quite strong. Even in the British grandees, there was a British Governor General's wife. She was known as the Governess General, because she started the Nurses Association and got, this is in the 19th century. Those kinds of positions, that was what women had, sort of unelected positions of influence. But Madam, and I have to say, in the viceregal game, the provinces did better than the feds. The first woman lieutenant governor in Ontario was Mrs. McGibbon, who was back in the 60s. You're the guy who knows Ontario better than me, but
I think it was the 70s. But it was early 70s, and yeah, Pauline McGibbon was the first female lieutenant governor and was there when Bill Davis was premier.
Yeah, you're right. It's the 70s. That's early again.
But Jeanne Sauvé is another interesting story because given that she was a woman and her husband was a real, he was a sort of captain of industry, a very active businessman, this would have been the first circumstance where the career of the partner of the governor general could get complicated. You want to give an example of that?
Well, in his case, it wasn't. In his case, he adored her and was so proud of her, and he kept his business going, and he did what he felt he had to do, but he had no problem with it. The only parallel one to that, I would say, is maybe in the provincial level, Mr. Weston didn't blink twice. He was very proud his wife was lieutenant governor, but the business of Weston's did not in any way get waylaid by Mrs. Weston being lieutenant governor. With Mrs. McGibbon, it just worked because they had that kind of relationship.
And for Madame Sauvé, same thing with her husband Maurice?
No. Her husband, it's in the book. Her husband was a bit of a scandal, actually. He was someone who saw, he had a kind of Trumpian sense of the office, that this was something that maybe was of value. And he suddenly was on the boards of a number of companies that were doing business with the government. And I know for a fact from a very good source that he was making inquiries of government decisions that affected companies. This is in the dredging business and this sort of thing. And it was very improper, and it could well have been a scandal. This was the person who tried to put a stop to it was the long-lasting Esmond Butler, who was the secretary to the Governor General, and he found himself out of a job and sent off to Morocco as an ambassador.
That's how we handled things in those days, eh? Just get them out of the country.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we're into a bit of a pattern here with Ed Schreyer, former politician, Jeanne Sauvé, also a former politician, and then we get to Hnatyshyn, appointed 1990 by Brian Mulroney, former Conservative cabinet minister, first non-Anglo, non-Franco Governor General. He had a Ukrainian background. The fact that he was a former Mulroney cabinet minister, how much of a difficulty did that present when he was appointed?
It caused a lot of commentary, but in the end, he was okay in the job. His wife had spousal alienation syndrome, but coped. And he wasn't spectacular. He wasn't terrible. And it showed that the job could be handled by someone who had a sincere heart. The anecdote I put in the paper to show some of the sort of silly things that happen with these things is he made his poor sons were never allowed to sit at a table except in a suit and jacket, or a jacket and a tie, because he had such a sense of awe for Rideau Hall and the office that he didn't want it disrespected by kids appearing in jeans. And I just felt so sorry for those boys.
Now, one of the things that Brian Mulroney did before appointing Mr. Hnatyshyn was that he consulted with the Liberal leader of the day, John Turner, and the NDP leader of the day, Ed Broadbent, before making the appointment. No obligation for him to do that, but he did it.
Yes.
How important a precedent was that in your view?
Well, it wasn't, because if he didn't like who he might be sort of trying to do something positive in terms of relations, but he may also conceivably had a controversial one and wanted to get some people on side. You and I know a story in which Mr. Mulroney phoned a provincial premier and asked extensively and got advice, and Mr. Mulroney appointed someone so opposite it was hysterical to what the advice was. So I mean, that was Mr. Mulroney. He was consulted often and still made up his own mind.
Mr. Mulroney's successor was Jean Chrétien. He appointed Romeo Leblanc in 1994, again, a former Liberal cabinet minister. So we're definitely into a kind of a partisan appointment situation here.
That did cause a big stink. The opposition refused to come in for the swearing in. They wouldn't sit in the House. And
you don't have much good to say about Romeo Leblanc. How come?
No, he was a good human being. I believe, we can now talk about it, I believe that dementia had set in. I mean, that was part of the problem. It was a foreshortened. His partner had the ultimate spousal alienation. She just hated the job, and I think they had to deal with someone who was losing it. And I put a story in. It was emblematic of that. It was also kind of funny. It was that he took a deep offense one day eating through his viceregal crockery and seeing at the bottom of it a heraldic lion sticking his tongue out at him. This is the lions that adorn every coat of arms the country's ever had. And not only that, it has
there
claws.
It is right there.
There it is.
There it is. There's
that
the
lion has
sticking
claws,
tongue out.
It has a tongue and it has genitalia. And he had it all removed. It's got a slight hint of, and he had it all removed. The tongue, the claws, and the genitalia. But they couldn't do it to the silver, the cost, and then he resigned, and Madame Clarkson came in, and so the claws came back and the tongue, and all was well.
Well, okay, let's talk about her. 1999, Adrienne Clarkson gets the job. There's lots of good stories about Adrienne Clarkson in your book. Let's tell a couple of them here. She and the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario both wanted to attend a ceremony for Desmond Tutu at the University of Toronto, which proved to be a sort of protocol nightmare. What's the story there?
Desmond Tutu was offered an honorary degree from the University of Toronto, and it was all organized to bring him over. And the president of the University of Toronto invited the lieutenant governor. That was all that was there. And then Madame Clarkson got wind of it, and she is a devout Anglican and an admirer of Desmond Tutu, and she wanted very much to be part of that story. So she let the university know that she wanted to come, and there is a kind of a protocol here that the university was paying no attention to, which is a governor general basically trumps a lieutenant governor, sort of, but doesn't. It's a whole interesting thing in that the lieutenant governors in their own bailiwick they don't get trumped. At least they don't feel they should be trumped. In any event, this set up a squabble because Madame Clarkson's people talked to Mrs. Weston's people and said, she should stand down. The Governor General is coming, and just as the Governor General, in theory, stands aside when the monarch comes, that's how it goes. Well. This lieutenant governor was not going to step down, and this lieutenant governor, Mrs. Weston, also came with a family that are important figures in Ontario for a whole bunch of reasons, including funding and at the University of Toronto. And there was no president of the University of Toronto was going to tell Mrs. Weston that she couldn't come. And no one could keep Madame Clarkson away. So there was a battle royale, and there's all sorts of stories. Some of them are apocryphal. One story I love was that Mrs. Weston threatened to call the Queen to solve it, and that's what ended the whole discussion. It's not true, but it was a story that made the rounds.
So how did they resolve it?
They both came, and
they both came.
A vice-regal procession is preceded by an aide de camp in full military uniform, and followed by the secretary with the speech in a leather case that is presented, and so there were 2 vice-regal processions, and it was
that's a decent compromise, I guess, isn't it?
It wasn't a compromise at all. They just all came.
Mm-hmm. Now, I do remember Adrienne Clarkson trying to shine a spotlight on the importance of the North. And she put together a bit of a tour of northern countries, because Canada is, after all, a northern country. And it turned into a bit of a foofara. What happened there?
She had a great idea, which was to use her office. She understood better than any other governor general in our history that the office was a platform. She didn't decree rules or anything, but that she had a platform and an ability to put a spotlight on things. And just as Mr. Chrétien used to have Team Canada go business trips abroad, she thought the cultural Canada should go abroad. And so northern countries were a natural thing, and she organized a big trip. This was supported by the government, and it went to countries like, Russia, Ukraine, Finland, Sweden, that sort of thing. There was a 2-part thing. In between the first trip and the second trip, the cost of it became public through access to information. And I think it was the NDP that took particular exception to this and thought it was a boondoggle. They didn't buy into the idea that it was Canada showing its face to the world. I thought it was a great idea, still do. But she got into such hot water, and the next prime minister after Chrétien Martin, he didn't get along with Madame Clarkson that well, and he's the one that should have defended her, and he just left her drifting in the wind, as they say, if they say. And that.
GGs really can't defend themselves, right? They can't get into arguments with politicians about stuff, can they?
And they basically have to take advice. That's what happens if you're not elected. You have to take advice from elected people.
There's one thing about Adrienne Clarkson's time as Governor General that I think is a real shame, which is she really helped put women's hockey on the map by donating a trophy that women's hockey players would compete for, the Clarkson Cup. Just as the Stanley Cup was presented by Lord Stanley of Preston, a former Governor General, and the Grey Cup for football was a gift as well of a former Governor General. Unfortunately, when professional women's hockey got its act together and they now have a league, they don't compete for the Clarkson Cup. They compete for something called the Walter Cup, which is, I guess, donated by the guy who owns the league. I think that's too bad. What do you think about that?
I agree. The Clarkson Cup should be back in business. The Stanley Cup's named after a Governor General, and Clarkson Cup, that was a beautiful gesture. And before we leave Madame Clarkson, she's not a controversial character, but she's a well-known character to lots of Canadians because she's a strong personality. But she was a great Governor General. She showed, on the one hand, the limits of how you can go in pushing the office onto the Canadian people, but she also had this incredible ability to reach into people's hearts. And I put the whole of her extraordinary speech on the return of the unknown soldier to Canada because it was one of the best bits of public oratory that we've ever heard in this country. And she had this ability to bring all the disparate strands somehow together and show that there were things that united us we didn't even know about, but that they were there. And to me, that's what a Governor General can do if they're motivated.
John, would it be churlish of me to remind you that you also called her, quote, a difficult customer in your book?
Well, we had our ups and downs in relationship. We're strong personalities. I give quarter, and she gives quarter, but not often.
Okay.
But I admire her
Her,
hugely. I admire her hugely.
Mhm. Her successor, Michaëlle Jean, 2005. And I love this part of the book because your daughter was a
Yeah.
big fan of hers and told you, Dad, don't be such a smartass in dismissing her. Was it your inclination to do that, given that,
It was, yeah, this
well,
is the problem. She was the one governor general I didn't really know. Of all the ones that were in there, I I hadn't managed to get her to come to my college. I hadn't been involved in any of her initiatives. I followed the prorogation issue that she had to deal with, which was to me the most interesting thing to write about it. And I was aware that her husband was a controversial figure at the beginning because people thought he was a separatist. He was actually French national. There was a problem over his passport, but I was maybe a bit cynical about her appointment by Martin because I thought he hadn't put a lot of thought in it, and he was trying to check off sort of some points to do with this. And but Kate Fraser, my middle daughter, who was a filmmaker and a social worker, had actually knew her and actually seen her at work because my daughter had worked with immigrant women, young women, coming to terms with coming often from very conservative cultures into a liberal society with conflicts between parents and children. And Kate was also, she worked with Schools Without Borders on using film as a way of people that couldn't talk about certain things, but they could talk to a camera. And so she saw the help that Madame Jeanne came to 3, 4, or 5 events or institutions that Kate had been involved in. And she had a dramatically more insight into what her challenges were than I had. So I just, for once in my life, sat and listened at the dining room table. I have 3 daughters and a strong wife, let me tell you, I mean, and so I more or less at one level let Kate tell the story. And I accepted that I actually didn't have the qualifications to do properly on Madame Jeanne, so I passed it over to someone who did.
Well, let's be a little more specific about that. Your daughter said that Michaëlle Jean, as a Black woman, may have particular challenges in that job that you, as a white man, might not understand. Was she right about that?
Yes, of course.
She was.
I do now. I mean,
okay. Yeah. Now, Michaëlle Jean, I think, is probably best known for the incident where Stephen Harper tries to prorogue Parliament because he's about to face a date with the noose. I'm being figurative here, but essentially he was about to lose a non-confidence vote, and instead he prorogued Parliament in hopes of buying time. And he went to Rideau Hall to meet with Michaëlle Jean to ask for a prorogation, and she made him cool his heels for several hours while she consulted experts. How do you think she managed all that?
Brilliantly. Because that's what she should have done. That's the only power left to a governor general. The only actual power is to make sure that what is being asked is proper for the country. I mean, if she had got word from a combined forces of the opposition that they had come to an agreement and they could control the House, she would have been within her rights to say, all right, well, I'm not going to allow a prorogation. I've been assured that the House can be kept together by this coalition that has presented itself. And Harper his heels would have been permanently frozen outside. He did not like being kept waiting, especially by someone who wasn't elected. And he had a lot of respect for the office, but not then, not at that moment. He had as much respect as Mackenzie King had for Lord Byng. And I'm just referring to another prorogation crisis where Governor General did hand on to an opposition. In any event, I had a sort of a side view of all this because there's a wonderful old history and political science prof at the U of T, Peter Russell, was semi-retired, but he was an official constitutional advisor to the office of Governor General, and he got summoned into action. And I was on the sidelines watching what happens when an academic gets hauled out of the obscurity of academe into the front pages. A limousine arrives to pick him up from the university, take him off to Ottawa. Is picked up by vice-regal limousine at the airport and consulted by the Governor-General of Canada about the future governance of Canada. I have to tell you, Peter Russell was not that humble during that day.
I know. I took a class from him at U of T. I remember. He was tough.
And I think he probably, I don't know this for sure, but judging from it, I think he probably told her she was within her rights to keep him off. You know, you are going to have to accede to this. You have not got I'm assuming all this, but I think it's probably true in its general horizons. He said you don't have anyone saying that they can form another government. And the government of the day, which, as far as we know, is still the government and has asked you to do something, you do have to accede. But you have a right to look at it carefully. It's a minority government, and you don't want your job at this point is to make sure there's not an unnecessary election. So she taught Stephen Harper a 3-hour lesson or whatever it was.
That's right. I remember being at a lunch with her, this is many years ago, and I asked her about this incident. And I said, ultimately you gave Stephen Harper his prorogation. How come? And she said, look, there was no actual vote of non-confidence taken yet.
Yeah.
And he was my first minister. How could I deny the right of a first minister, absent a vote, to give him what he wanted? And it took her a few hours, obviously, to get there with Peter Russell's help, but that was the decision. And of course, Mr. Harper managed to wait it out, and the opposition coalition fell apart, and Stephen Harper lived to fight another day. And that's how it all worked out.
I think the key there was not an actual vote had not taken place.
Correct. Yeah.
And
okay, the next guy.
Harper was a pretty sly cat, too. I mean, he knew what he was doing.
Indeed. The next guy, David Johnston, appointed in 2010, again by Stephen Harper. And I don't know about you, but when I think of Governors General, he's sort of the prototype that I think of. What did you think of the job he did?
Great job. And I think the way he was appointed was great. He was according to the system that Harper put in place from a committee. And yeah.
So you vetted him then?
I was not on that committee. No.
Okay. But you're content with the committee's decision?
Yeah. And the committee's capable of getting it wrong too, I suppose. But at least they, and he had some baggage. He had some baggage to do with for some of the politicos in Ottawa. They didn't like that he had let Brian Mulroney off the hook on a prior cause célèbre. But basically, he was an educator, very distinguished, and had a good record. And actually, about 2 days before it was announced that it was to be him, I was at the Queen and Prince Philip were in Toronto, their last trip to Canada, and there was a big dinner at the Royal York that Harper gave. And I was sitting at David Johnston's table next to Mrs. Johnston. And I was pretty sure I knew it was going to be them. I was like 90% sure. And I had my spies well located. And I said to Ms. Johnston, I think your life's going to change. I suspect your life's going to change. And her eyes watered up. And I knew then that
this is Sharon's eyes, his wife.
Her eyes started watering. I knew that she was just terrified of it.
And yet, by all accounts, she was a fantastic chatelaine.
She was.
Yep.
But she had a really hard time adjusting to it. And she was a good soul. And the ending. He was a great Governor General, and he should have been allowed to be in a wonderful pasture at the end of it and left alone. And that damn Justin was trying to get out of a pickle, and so he sort of dragged him back into the limelight and sullied their reputation a little bit with that, asking him to adjudicate whether it had been Chinese interference. Well, you know that story.
Indeed. Well, while we're on to Justin Trudeau, let's talk about his advisor, Jerry Butts, whom you discussed. And in the book, and you and Mr. Butts had a conversation in which you told him you kind of liked
it was a conversation in which I'd sent him an email saying that I thought you may not like Harper, but this was a good idea, and I was hoping
the vetting committee was a good idea.
The vetting committee would continue because I thought it was a good way, and I thought a prime minister should be grateful for it, But as Mr. Butts lectured me, he said, "Yeah, they're very proud of it, but we think we can do better." And better turned out to be Julie Payette.
Julie Payette, a Justin Trudeau appointee in 2017. On paper, she seemed perfect for the job. Astronaut, scientist, great public profile, brilliant career. What happened?
They didn't do due diligence.
Meaning?
Well, it took the star, I don't know. I said it in the book, 2 nanoseconds. I meant that they found out very quickly that it wasn't, she didn't do it purposely, but she did run down a homeless person and kill them in a car accident. And she also was detained by police for going after her estranged husband with a weapon. That's a domestic turmoil, which normally wouldn't have come out in her life, but for the fact that she was being considered Governor General. And they claim later that they did check that. They obviously didn't check it. They would not have appointed her Governor General if they'd known this kind of stuff was out there. Because,
and all this came out before she even took office, right?
Yeah. And she had to go through talking about how sad she was and something she'll have to live with, that she killed this poor homeless person. And they never checked with anyone at the Montreal Science Center. What was she like as an employer? If they'd gone there, they would have found out that here's the tragedy, Steve. This is a woman who had made it through engineering school, a French or Canadian woman from working class background that had got herself an engineering degree in a classroom full of alpha males, that got into one of the most competitive systems to get to be considered as an astronaut, and ended up down in NASA among just the most complete alpha males, got into space, and all of the qualities that made her so spectacular, even better than most men would be to get that position, were exactly the wrong qualities for the position of Governor General. There's the tragedy, and I know this is retrospect looking, but that should have been obvious from the fact that she had low patience for ineptitude, because she liked stuff done like she was on a Cape Canaveral spaceship. You don't make mistakes, and you get angry if they're done, and so this was a nightmare job that she got.
One of the things about your book that I like so much is that there are many personal moments in the book that you share, and you did share a personal confrontation that you and she had, in which she accused you of being part of a quote-unquote lynch mob trying to hound her out of office. Did you think there was any truth to the accusation? She certainly believed it.
She said she was lynched, it's hard to sum it up. What she was entitled to was a chance to have her own consultation about what was happening to her, and she never was given that opportunity. The Prime Minister arrived and said it's over, and she didn't have a lawyer present. She claimed she tried to get hold of the Chief Justice and he wouldn't return her calls. Well, I in the confrontation, I didn't say that's because he's probably already spoken to the Chief Justice to tell him that he's going to be the acting Governor General. She had during the time she was in Rideau Hall, she had made herself alone. She had resisted any advice or help, so that when this moment came, she was completely alone and didn't know who to go to. There was no one around to help her, because no one wanted to help her. People had tried to, but nevertheless, it was a tragedy, and she had a right to some legal advice about what her position was, her constitutional advice. The aforementioned mentor, Mr. Jackman, said she was lynched.
All right, let's move to the current Governor General, Mary Simon. And you say in the book, John, You say in the book she's quote unquote missing the boat. What does that mean?
She's sort of a one-issue Governor General. She's a good person. Now, of course, I'm feeling guilty that I wrote anything nasty. She's about to step down, but she's not been a great Governor General. She's been an adequate Governor General, and she's got a wonderful partner who's a warm and lovely person. Also a Fraser.
Whit Fraser, who's got a memoir coming out right now.
Yeah, I called her the grim prioress of Rideau Hall because she does have a problem trying to make people feel welcome. She does have a problem communicating any sense of warmth or joy. So that's just her nature. And she maybe makes her really good at the work that she did before, but she was not a suitable Governor General. I mean, she's done the basic things, of course. She gives out the medals, but so did Romeo Leblanc, and he had dementia. That's not what you're looking for in that job. You're looking for some inspiration. And one of the reasons I still support the connection to the crown is that little bit of medieval, whatever it is, in hereditary monarchy actually adds a tiny bit of something, stardust or something, to this job. If we had Governors General of the repeated quality of David Johnston and Adrienne Clarkson, I don't think I would be so keen on keeping the link, but I don't think we know how to do that consistently. So having a little bit of extra magic and also tied to indigenous realities, which people tend to dismiss, and they're foolish to dismiss it, is a reason for holding on to the crown.
Well, let's finish up with a bit of a lightning round of questions here, okay? I'm going to give you fast questions, and I want fast answers. Number one, who was the best Governor General of your lifetime?
Tied, Vanier and Clarkson.
And define best how?
One was emphasized the dignity of the office, and the other the romance and potential of the office.
Who was the worst Governor General of your lifetime?
It was poor Julie Payette.
And worst because?
Because she did not understand that the job was not about her, it was about the country.
Who should be our next Governor General?
How about you, Steve? How's your French?
How about I'm not qualified because I'm not fluently bilingual, but nice try, John Fraser.
How was Mr. Johnston's French? How was Madame Simon's French?
Oh, my God. You're so mischievous. We're moving on. Seriously, though, who should be the next Governor General?
You would be wonderful, Steve.
Oh, stop it. All right, we're moving on.
Bring the whole country together.
Do you know, I'm moving on because that's a ridiculous answer. Do you know which Governor General Queen Elizabeth liked the best?
I don't know, but I do know who she liked a lot, and she loved Jean Chrétien very much, and gave him a huge
as
honor.
Prime Minister. Yes, but which GG did she like the best?
I think probably Mr. Massey. Funnily enough.
Oh, no kidding. Okay, all right.
She let his dog carry her purse. There was a famous picture.
Now, you've already told us that you were under consideration for a Lieutenant Governor of Ontario position. To the best of your knowledge, were you ever under consideration for the Governor General's position?
I was, and I turned it down too. Because my French is no good.
Which Prime Minister considered you?
The same one. The same one.
Stephen Harper.
No. It was. I was asked by the committee if I was asked, first of all, who I thought might be good. I mean, I started something called the Institute for the Study of the Crown in Canada, which was to aid and support understanding how our system works. And in the course of that, one of the people that were on the original committee was a wonderful French Canadian theologian, Jacques Monette, who was also monarchist, and he was one of the people that went around asking. And I was asked if it was offered, would I be interested in it? And I was able to give the same answer twice. But
John,
I would have been one of several people that would have been asked, and it was under the Harper regime. It was flattering.
But knowing you as I do, and knowing how much you care about the Crown, and knowing about how much you revere this institution, do I infer correctly that this has to be one of the great disappointments of your life, that you felt you couldn't accept the job if offered?
Wrong. I knew it would be a terrible job for me because of some character traits which are really good for journalism, but they're probably not very good for that job. And I said in this article in the Globe this morning, I talk too much. I don't believe in secrets. I think those are for spies and people who want to feel self-important. And I suffer fools gladly because I like them, and sometimes they're very wise. I mean, I have dramatically inadequate skills for that job. And there you go.
John, you'd have been entertaining as hell in the position. It would have been fun to cover that.
Yeah. As a single man, too. That was the other issue.
Yes. Elizabeth McCallum might not have hung around for the ride. That spousal alienation might have been a thing with her. I want to thank you for writing the book, because it's really, as John Ibbitson said in the Globe and Mail, you are so gossipy and delicious. And those are great ways to describe The Governors General, An Intimate History of Canada's Highest Office by John Fraser, our guest. Thank you so much, John. It's been great chatting with you.
And Steve, don't say no when they call you, okay?
Oh, stop it. Moving on again. You're so difficult. Reminder to everybody, patreon.com/the Paikin Podcast, where you can find web-exclusive videos and make some story suggestions, including probably the idea that we're never having this guy back on because he's such a mischievous guest. All of our shows are archived at stevepaikin.com. Thank you, John Fraser, I think. Peace and love, everybody. See you next time.